for a long time, and eventually it was published, as you know, this year. So I'm happy to think about it and also share some of its key features. So this is a paper that you might see if you have had a chance to look at it. It's a critical engagement in the theory of the study of religion. And so if there are any points at any point you feel that you have any question, maybe you should just jot it down and then we can come back to it. If it's very urgent, you can stop me and then maybe, or just alert, the chair, for example, and then I could also just elaborate. So I'd like to take you, all of you with me on this journey as I share some of its key findings. I'd encourage you then, if you haven't had a chance to read it, so then afterwards you can read it again. So let me first begin by sharing with you the problematic, what we call the problematic. What is it that I'm trying to, what is it that I'm trying to ask? What are the kinds of questions that I had? And what is it that I'm trying to propose? So it's a topic within the study of religion. So basically, in the last 2 or 3 decades, there has been a lot of criticism of the category of religion. Before that, people just assumed that it was a natural category. It was something very useful. But since then, through various kinds of critical engagements, the category of religion has been questioned. What I mean by that is that the category as a universal idea, that when we speak about religions, whether it is Islam, Christianity, African religions, indigenous religions in America, Australia, they are so diverse. Is it useful to call them religion? Have one term for all of them, and so this has been put under a lot of question. And I'm proposing that yes, it is still useful, but we need to accept the fact that there is the criticism is somewhat has actually, there is some value in it, and also I want to look a little bit more carefully at this criticism and come up with what is useful so that we can use the term again. So the question that I'm posing is that the critique that I'm talking about is directed at something called natural religion, which is the object for the study of religion. The term natural religion, I mean, in the 18th century, and particularly in the Enlightenment, among Enlightenment scholars like Immanuel Kant and others, David Hume, philosophers basically, believe that there was such a thing as natural religion, that religion was something very human. It was part of, the very construction of being human. Just like economics was part of being human, or politics, for example, or literature, religion was also something naturally human. And so they called it natural religion. And since then, it has been the object of the study of religion. The students of religion have tried to identify what is its essence universally, right? Everywhere when you come to religion, you will always come to this or that or that. The scholars have actually been debating among themselves about what is the nature of this religion, but until the 1980s, they never questioned that there was a natural religion. So what is this natural religion? I've just given a short definition of it. I hope that it is sufficient for now. It comes from a book that I would recommend, those of you who want to take this further into the study of religion. This book by Walter Capps, published in 1995. It's called The Discipline of the Study of Religion, Religious Studies. Sorry, I don't remember the title right now, but perhaps I can share that with you. Walter Capps basically put together a 600-page book in which he described what is the study of religion. And he says in his book, in contrast to revealed or received religion, natural religion was understood to be accessible and available to all. Again, I want to emphasize what I've already said, but this definition says that we're not talking about religion that is revealed to somebody or some people. we think about natural religion as belonging to all human beings. That human beings, by virtue of them being human, are also religious. That was the assumption that was being made at the time. But they also said that when we talk about natural religion in that way, we need to identify clearly what it is. That it is not politics, it is not economics, that it has something unique that is shared by all the different religions. So there's a lot of interesting interplay between what we call revealed religions or received religions, religions that are, conveyed from one generation to another, or this absolute or this, this kind of a universal religion where all human beings share in it as such. Now, this is this understanding of natural religion has been in the last 3 decades. It has come under a lot of criticism. And I'm asking, what was this critique of natural religion since the 1980s in this paper? What is the nature of this critique as such? And I'm making a distinction between what is a postmodernist critique and a post-colonial critique. And I will explain to you what it means by that through this critique. I will show you what is a postmodernist critique and a post-colonial critique. And in particular, I wanted to emphasize in this paper the post-colonial critique, because I think the post-colonial critique is valuable for understanding religions. Apologies for that mistake there, for the typographical error, for understanding religion in contemporary times. And so the post-colonial critique of religion offers questions and opportunities for future studies. So this is what I've presented here in this first slide is a kind of a broad map of what I was trying to do. There's a kind of background that I was bringing to this paper and how I was then moving and interrogating, looking a bit more carefully at this, what we call this critique of natural religion. Since the 1980s, I divide between postmodernist and post-colonial, and then I'm privileging, in a way, I am privileging the post-colonial critique, as you will see. I'm not spending so much of time with the postmodernists, but I will do enough just to give you an idea of the distinction. Most of the scholars who write about this don't make these distinctions. I haven't seen a very clear distinction being made. They actually put them all together, and I'm separating them. And I think that they are much more valuable, as you will see, and the reason for that. Okay, so this is the first step, basically just an overview. I hope you get a sense of the questions that I'm approaching, what I'm doing as such. I was actually thinking whether, the first time I heard about critique, I don't know about you, but I always thought, what does this actually mean? We know about criticism, we know about being critical, but critique means, producing a kind of a judgment about something. Critique is a term that comes from Marxist analysis. So he presented a critique of, capitalism, basically finding the major issues that are a problem with the capitalism. And so the term comes from sort of a Marxist genealogy. So the same kind of application, the same kind of analysis is applied to natural religion. It's basically a report that presents, the foundations of something that you're studying, in this case, religion. And generally, it is a negative dimension. So there's critique always includes some kind of a judgment and a negative judgment about that. So maybe just some short reflection on what we mean by critique. Okay, so the first critique of religion is what I call postmodernist or deconstructivist. This is a critique, or at least a judgment made about natural religion. So natural religion, the scholars who first began to write about this, and I will share one name with you, Jonathan Z. Smith. He is from California, who presented, he has presented a sort of a long-term impact. His work has had a long-term impact on the study of religion, especially from a postmodernist or deconstructivist critique. I'm putting both postmodernist and deconstructivist. Apologies for putting both terms there. If you have maybe later in the question and answer, we can distinguish those. But if you will see what I mean by that in a minute. So the postmodernists or the deconstructivists say religion is not real. So in contrast to the modernists, people who came before them, who accepted
the fact that religion is a natural category. It belongs to human beings. Human beings have all of human beings possess it. They say, no, it's not real. It's a production of scholarship. That scholars have actually produced the world. And this is a feature of a lot of the scholarship at the time that moved away from the idea that we are studying reality by saying that actually, yes, we are studying reality, but most of our understanding of reality is coming through the words that we are speaking. We are constructing reality as we are studying it. So when we speak about politics, for example, or when we speak about religion in this case, we're not really speaking about something real. We are sort of, the more we talk about it, we imagine there is a term that is shared across the board, but we are constantly creating it because we are creating the very nature of this term by giving some ideas to say that, okay, religion is about belief. And then we are looking for beliefs everywhere. And then we say all of these are beliefs. So it's a way of saying, it's a way of thinking about how language creates the world. Not necessarily, language is not necessarily only pointing to the world, it is also creating the world, it is constructivist. Again, if I'm using some terms that you need some clarification, we can just come back to that. Okay, so religion is not real, it's a production of scholarship. And this is the scholar, Jonathan Smith. He's better known, I wanted to change it, but I forgot to modify it a bit. It's Jonathan Z. Smith. He's often known as Jonathan Z. Smith. So I've got two quotations for you, which actually give a very good insight of his thinking. And these quotations have been shared, by scholars. Every time when you look at the criticism of religion as a natural category, you will come across Jonathan Z. Smith. But more than that, you will come across these definitions. And these definitions are very, very useful for us to think about a postmodernist, or what I would call a deconstructivist critique. He says, there is nothing that is inherently sacred or profane. Watch each of these words, what it means, right? So there is nothing in particular, there's nothing that, because of, some religions would say, for example, there is a river that is sacred, there is a mountain that is sacred, or there is, a space that is sacred, there's a city that is sacred. He says nothing is inherently sacred. These are not substantive categories, but rather situational or relational categories, mobile boundaries which shift according to the map being employed. There is nothing that is sacred in itself, only things sacred in relation. So what he's saying here is that when people speak about, both people and scholars, when they talk about sacred and profane, it is not something very substantive. It is not something very real. It is not something that, that sacredness is not in the thing itself, but it is in the relationships that people build with that place or with that thing. It is the stories that they are telling you about them. It is the maps that they are creating, through their practices. There is nothing sacred in itself, only things sacred in relation. So what you are seeing here is previous scholars, people like before him, not maybe even 10 years before him, they would say, when all religions, for example, have sacred places, for example, sometimes, for example, Makkah is sacred, Medina is sacred, Jerusalem is sacred, and certain kinds of practices are associated with that. What he is saying is that this sacredness is not something in itself, it is what people have done in relation to these things. So in a way that to say, well, Makkah is sacred, but not in the same way that Medina is, or Jerusalem is sacred for Jews in a different way that it is sacred for Muslims, or a different way that it is sacred for Christianity. I'm just sort of using quickly these examples to show you how he would say how these things keep on changing. And if you look at these terms that he is using, it's situational, it's relational categories, you can see how the sacred might actually be changing depending on the kind of relationships that you have with it. Okay, so this is the first, what you can clearly see, it is a deconstructivist in the sense that it is telling you that, okay, this is not something that you are, that is there, but if you just simply change your focus a little bit, you can see how that thing no longer becomes sacred. For some, something is not sacred for everybody. The same place is not sacred for everybody because people keep on changing what they're doing. But even among themselves, among particular religious groups themselves, the sacred is relational. You would also say, in addition, that's why the scholars of religion
he is obviously definitely addressing himself to scholars of religion, that scholars of religion should not accept the sacredness of things in themselves. They should accept the sacredness because these are relational categories, because these are changing categories, these are situational categories. Okay, so there's another quotation that I found of his, which is also very popular. It comes from an essay of his in 1998. Religion is not a native term. And this is another important dimension of the postmodernist critique. It is a term created by scholars for their intellectual purposes and therefore is theirs to define. It is a second order generic concept that plays the same role in establishing a disciplinary horizon that a concept such as language plays in linguistics or culture plays in anthropology. So in the second quotation, he is now addressing the scholars who are studying religion much more directly than the first one. In the first one might say he is addressing himself to the scholars, but more importantly, he's also speaking about, the relational nature of the sacred. Here he's saying religion is not a native term. He's saying that religion is not used by the people who practice religion. It is not something that they are using. It is a term that is created by scholars for their intellectual purposes. And so they have the responsibility to define. You don't have to go into the society to find out what is the definition of religion. Okay? It is something created by scholars for themselves. Then it is second order. First order is how you practice religion. Second order are the people who discuss religion. Generic, it is a second order generic concept that can be used in different places, but it plays the same role in establishing a disciplinary horizon for the study of religion, just like we use linguistics for language or we use culture in anthropology. So these terms, these are language, culture, religion, are intellectual concept used by intellectuals. They are not used by ordinary religious people. They're not used by people who are engaged in religion as such. So what Jonathan Smith is actually saying, first of all, in the first quotation, he is deconstructing. He's saying the religion, these categories are not really sacred. In the same way, he's saying we should be aware that we are constructing these terms as scholars, and they can be useful for us. And he himself thinks the term is useful, but we don't necessarily think that it has some kind of a real foundation in the way that Enlightenment scholars before him thought about that. So what postmodernist or deconstructivist critique does, it unsettles the discipline. It tells the discipline that the discipline doesn't really have very stable categories that can be shared across, the world as such. It's not universal as such. It is questioning the foundations of the discipline, the very foundation of the discipline, to say there is a natural religion, there is something that's shared among humans. It is saying, actually, these are things that you're just creating for yourself. But then the show must go on somehow. But then it still believes, as you can see from these quotations, Jonathan Z. Smith doesn't necessarily think that you need to stop studying religion. So the scholars of religion among themselves, they can continue to study religion, but as long as they know that these conditions, at least these two conditions, that they are not substantive categories, and it is for them to define it. It is not for anybody else to do so. Somehow they continue to study religion in the way that they have developed it. They become much more critical of it. They become much more aware of the nuances about the changing dimension of religion. And that is what is generally happening today in the academy. And a lot of scholars believe that this is not sufficient in itself. You have undercut the nature of religion. So it is no longer possible to study, religions in the Amazon and religions in the Middle East, for example, or religions in India compared to religions maybe in Australia as such. One has to then begin to look at so many different categories. Somehow it unsettles the discipline in a way that forces us, in the way that I'm doing today, to ask, okay, where do we go from here now? Does it mean that we give up the term religion, or do we look for another term? Do we look for another way of doing so? Okay, so having given you an idea of the deconstructivist critique, I want to point to a different kind of critique in the study of religion, also from around the 1980s. One can trace it back to earlier critical scholars like Edward Said and before him other anti-colonial scholars. But before I go into what is post-colonial critique, I want to share with you a statement by Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall is a sociologist and a literary scholar from the Caribbean who lived for some time in London, and he was doing a lot of studies of African literature in African literature and politics in the United Kingdom. And he's very well known for writing about post-colonialism. So this is the definition that I want to share with you. It helps perhaps to orientate us to how I am thinking about post-colonial, all right? So what does he say? Post-colonial is not the end of colonization. It is after a certain kind of colonialism, and I put in red, after a certain moment of high imperialism and colonial occupation, in the wake of it, in the shadow of it, inflected by it. It is what it is because something else has happened before, but it is also something new. Now, I know I have often spent a lot of time thinking what a sentence like this means, but I will share with you what I think are the key dimensions of what is in this one sentence. It actually, I was preparing this, in the last few days, and I was looking for I thought that somebody might ask me, what is post-colonialism? So I looked for a definition. I don't have it in my paper, but I think it would have been a nice, addition right now that I'm sharing with you. What does it say? There are three dimensions of the post-colonial. First of all, it is after actual occupation. So post-colonial is once independence was received by, those of you in India in the 1940s, in South Africa only in 1994. But we are living in the post-colony because it is after actual occupation. We're not living under occupation anymore. It means the physical occupation of the colonial powers. But we are living in the shadow of colonialism. So this is the term that he uses here, in the wake of it, in the shadow of it, inflected by it. We can't somehow escape the effects of colonialism, or we can't escape the shadow of colonialism, okay? Post-colonialism is an awareness of what was there before and beyond colonialism. So this is what he says. It is what it is because something else has happened before. So one could actually say, take that sentence or that phrase to mean that even though we are in post-colony, we are aware that we are after colonialism, that we cannot escape the idea. So in a sense, it's the same as the last one, the shadow of it. But it could also mean, as I will show you in my examples, that you could also have a knowledge of what happened before colonialism as well. Okay, before. So I'm actually taking it awareness of what was there before and beyond colonialism. It's almost like, in India, for example, the post-colonial scholars are aware of the colonial, they're aware of the impact of the colonial, but they're also aware of the Mughal emperors, and they're also aware of what happened before in India. But it is also something new, right? So this is a different, but there is also something new. There is something new now developing in the context, even though it is under the shadow of colonialism, even though it is an awareness. So the post-colonial critique, for example, of religion, of politics, has the burden of carrying all of these. You can't ignore that certainly we are after occupation, but you are still under the shadow of colonialism. You're aware that there was something before, but now you have something new. You cannot go back to what was there before. You cannot go back to it where it was, but you are in new opportunities, new awareness, but still carrying the burden of that. Maybe I should say, perhaps you've already heard about the word decolonial, which actually says, no, we need to do away with all of this and just jump to the decolonial. My argument is, maybe we can pick that up, but I'm not going to discuss it in this paper. But I think that it's useful to think again about what the post-colonial offers, because I think the post-colonial gives birth to the decolonial, as I've tried to say in my essay. Okay, but I hope that this is somewhat clarified, at least clear or provisionally clear. I hope at least that you can work with this, that you can think about the post-colonial, and maybe we can come back to that
But what I want to use this, I want to use this as a background for how I'm going to talk about the post-colonial critique of religion. Okay. By the post-colonial critique of religion, what I'm doing in this paper, I'm using three scholars who have been very influential in my work and also many other people's work as such. They are very highly influential scholars in the study of religion. I think they are contributing to our post-colonial critique of religion. And these three individuals help us to think about religion in this kind of post-colonial moment. So David Chidester, this is my summary of it, says that religion is created through colonial conquest, and I will show that to you. Talal Asad says religion is created in secular modernity. I'm just alerting you now, and I'm going to come to them. And then Charles Long, before him, Charles Long was basically doing his work already from the 1960s, but he was from the Caribbean, so he basically brought the experience of colonialism with him into America. That he said that, as his work says, that religion is shaped by the experiences of subjugation and liberation. Let me elaborate briefly on each one of them. Let me start with David Chidester. I'm going in reverse order from the youngest to the oldest. In this kind of way. Normally we sort of go from before to here, but I think I want to go this way because each one of them was influenced by the person who came before. So David Chidester is a scholar of the study of religion. If you look at Google his work, you will come across many of his works. He's a very well-known scholar. He's actually a Californian, but he got a job in South Africa in the University of Cape Town, and that's how I was. He was my colleague for a lot of time, and then he became South African. And then it is only through the impact of the work of Talal Asad, in fact, that David and the impact of being in South Africa, that he turned his work towards a kind of from a postmodernist approach to the study of religion to a post-colonial as such. Now, what David Chidester says is there is a dialectic of denial and representation of religion in the colony. What do we mean by that? Let me elaborate. So he's in his work that he published in 1996 called Savage Systems. I just found this very strong quote that will help us to just unpack what he is saying. According to Portuguese, Dutch, and English traders, Africans had no religion to organize relations among human beings or relations between humans and material objects. So this was a sort of a denial. He basically, the people who used to be traveling to Africa or who were going to Americas, who were going to particularly North America among the American Indians, South America, Australia, particularly in the far reaches of the country, not so much in the Middle East, or in India, for example, they were always reporting that the people did not have religion. They were somehow devoid of religion. They couldn't understand their religions. And so they often would say they have no religions. And this is David Chidester summarizing what he's saying. Africans had no religion to organize relations among human beings or relations between humans and material objects. This denial of religion, David Chidester suggests it's not necessarily because they thought that they couldn't understand them, or they could not make sense of their religions, but it was closely connected to a process of occupation. That these people had to be occupied, they had to be conquered, and so before conquest, over and over again, especially within South Africa, David Chidester in his work shows how the people who were confronting the indigenous people, the African people in South Africa, kept on being told when they were not conquered yet that they had no religion. That means that they were not human, or at least that they could be conquered. They were just like plants or animals, for example, and they could actually be conquered. And so the denial of religion was one part of this dialectic. It started before occupation, in the moment of conquest, for example, or just before conquest.
these people don't have religions. They don't necessarily, not like human beings. They can be conquered. They have to be brought under control, or they have to be converted into Christianity. But immediately after they are conquered, then they are represented. They are represented after conquest. Once contained under colonial control, an indigenous population was found to have its own religious system. So once the people are controlled, once the people are conquered, now you are bringing them under the control of, in South Africa, it was the Dutch occupation, later it was the English. Then you can count them, you can see what kind of beliefs they've got, what are their experiences, how do they pray, how do they not pray, how do they relate among themselves. Suddenly, they seem to be having a religion. The religion that they were previously denied is somehow found for them. So David Chidester, I'm summarizing a whole book here in these two points as such, speaks about this, the religion is being invented on the colonial frontier. And it is invented through a dialectic of denial and representation. That means denial and then finding something. But the finding something is only once you are under control. Once you can start saying, okay, this is my religion, this is not, these are the religions that exist in the world. This is what a modern state is doing. This is what a colonial state has to do. But now it is a religion under control as such. But before that, this very same people were said not to be having a religion. So this is quite important. This is one important part of David Chidester's work, like I suggested in his work as such. But David Chidester also has another dimension because of this colonial history in the 18th and the 19th century. Some people might suggest it even goes before that. What happens in religion in the post-colony, after apartheid, for example, is, and I quote him again, it's an ongoing complex mobilization of certain symbolic forms as alternative instruments of power in Africa. So what David Chidester is saying is that religion in its construction, in its colonial construction, was invested with a lot of power, was invested with power dynamics. You have the power, I have the power, you don't have it. So basically, and then the power was taken away from the religions that were being denied or they were being found as such. And so therefore that power dynamics, that kind of a conflict about religion being totally involved in power dimension emerges within post-colonial religion. And he writes, for example, particularly on religion after apartheid, in South African apartheid context, religion takes on this kind of power dimension. It's an ongoing complex mobilization of certain symbolic forms as alternative instruments of power. So whether it is the instrument of, the power of the instrument of the religious symbols that emerge as markers of power, markers of authority in the streets, in the parliament, for example, he says that this is the result of what religion has become. So one cannot deny the power that is inherent within post-colonial religion. That is what it's actually saying. So what you notice is there are two dimensions in the study of religion, according to David Chidester, and I will show that with everybody else. The first dimension is religion is created in the context of colonialism. This particular religion that David Chidester is speaking about, it is not something that has a longer history that goes before colonialism. It is created within colonial context. And then secondly, it has a long shadow. It has a long effect in the post-colony as well. So you see this two dimension, how religion is created, but also its long shadow. Now remember, I said that postmodernism also says that religion is created. So in that sense, they are in agreement of that. But what postmodernism doesn't do, the postmodern critique doesn't do, it doesn't reflect on its long shadow, on the long shadow of colonially created religion in the post-colony. This is something that David Chidester is actually doing. Let me just take a break. I see I'm very dark because it's actually gone late here. So let me just switch on my light, perhaps. Perhaps it's a little bit, okay, so is that okay? I think that's a little bit better. You can see me now. Right. I want to go on. I want to
I happen to do the same thing with Talal Asad and the same thing with Charles Long. I'm okay still, Muhammad Ali. Shall I continue?
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir. Sure. Continue.
Yeah. Okay. So then David Chittister is, as I said, I think becoming a scholar or working with him, David Chittister is always in the background. And so I'm sharing with you, what his contribution is to the postcolonial critique. And as I was writing this paper, I began to understand, what value that is offers. So what I'm saying is that what he is pointing to is that when we study religion in the post-colony outside, we cannot ignore the kind of power dimensions, the complex of power relationships that are built into a religion of denial and discovery. And I think one can look at the implications of this much further than even what David Chittister is actually doing. The other person who, right from my graduate studies, has had an influence on my work is Talal Asad. And Talal Asad is not so much unlike David Chittister, who was looking at religion in the periphery, that means in the places where there's occupation or there's colonial conquest taking place, but Talal Asad is interested in what kind of religion is created in the center, in modernity itself. So, but Talal Asad himself starts with a different dimension of religion chronologically. So he first began to look at, he's an anthropologist. You might know that his father was Muhammad Asad, very famous for a translation of the Quran. And Talal Asad became an anthropologist in the United Kingdom and did the anthropological study of Egypt. But then on the 1980s, he began to turn attention to religion as such. But when he did that, he first began by speaking about religion as a discourse. So when he was comparing Islam with in the study of religion, he found, or he argued, that this Islam being studied in the academy was not able to capture the full meaning of Islam as a discourse. And he suggested, not only Islam, but he thought about other religions as well, that he thought that religion is a discursive tradition. And this is a definition that comes from his essay in 1986. A discursive tradition, my emphasis, that connects variously with the formation of moral selves, the manipulation of populations or resistance to it, and the production of appropriate knowledges. Now, this is a mouthful there, but what Talal Asad is actually saying, it is a discursive tradition that has a lot to do with what the kind of how people talk about religion, how people discuss what is the nature of religion, discuss what they have to do and what they don't have to do. It is about morality, it's about moral selves, about ahkam. It is also about populations, about who is a Muslim, who is not a Muslim, who is a kafir, who is not, for example, and the production of appropriate knowledge. It is also includes, philosophies as such. So what you can see here is religion as a discourse, Talal Asad is arguing, is a rich and a very full idea of the nature of human beings, of the nature of human societies, basically. And Talal Asad is saying that this particular discourse, this kind of religion, the religion as a discourse, has been replaced by something else, has been replaced by another type of religion that has been created in modernity. So the first part of his work is that there is a discourse, and that discourse continues. It's the people still engaging, for example, in the Quran or in the Hadith or in moral traditions, for example, that still continues as such. But there is another kind of religion that appears on the scene. And he was saying in the earlier essays, for example, what I was saying is that he was saying that the scholars of Islam were basically approaching the study of Islam not as a discourse, but as something that is from a concept, from a perception of what is religion in modernity, this other dimension, which was something new. And what was that? Well, what is this religion in modernity? In a book in 1993 called Genealogies of Religion, he describes in quite detail how from the 14th, 15th century in Europe, religion began to undergo transformation. The development of new types of economics, new types of knowledge, more rationalization, the conquests, for example, taking place. Alongside that, the Christianity was transformed, and the Protestant Christianity played a very important role to move from what you do to your body, what you do with your body, what you do with yourself, to something that is inside, something that the main part of religion is what you really believe. So, for example, the main argument of Protestants against Catholicism, for example, taking a little bit maybe as an oversimplification, but it makes the point. Christianity has got so many different, Catholicism, for example, has got so many different things you have to do, so many things you have to do in a day or in a week or in a month, for example, you have to do different kinds of prayers every day. Whereas Protestantism is saying that actually it's more to do with your heart, what is in your heart, what is your belief. Belief is more important no matter what you do. So what Al-Assad is saying is recording this not only in Christianity, but also recording how the judiciary in Europe, in the West, for example, how politics, for example, changed. And when it changed, it also began to change the nature of religion. It began to think about religion in a very different way. He calls that kind of a modern religion or religion in modernity. Then the second part of his study in 2003, in a book called Formation of the Secular, he says that religion is defined and shaped in opposition to the secular. So again, the same story he picks up, it's the same kind of story he gives in 1993, but now he gives a different story. In this, there's a whole lot of overlaps in the story, but in this particular dimension, with the emergence of the secular not just simply as a kind of a fact, but as a kind of a culture, secular culture, then religion came to acquire new types of meanings, for example. So let me give you one specific example of that. So if you contrast what is history and what is mythology. Mythology is a story that you might think about as all religions have stories, right? About how the world started, and the mythologies would have how, revelation came about and how the individuals who received it, like the Prophet ﷺ, or maybe other religious traditions, the shamans who have this kind of experiences when they go into the caves, for example. Now, the story about those experiences, one would call them mythology, myths as such. But that's not history. So what is history is secular, is what you can measure, what you can see an evidence of, what you can actually record. It's secular. Whereas mythology has got some elements of what is historical, but also has elements which are not historical. The scholars of religion, the scholars of philosophy would call the one history, the other myths. So the myths take on a meaning because of history. As history is developing into a secular discipline, what you have is the remaining, what religions do becomes more and more like a myth. Religions become less and less historical, more and more mythological. So the definition of myth takes place as a kind of a opposition, towards historical. You only get history, it means history in a secular way, if you understand that it is not mythology, as an opposition to mythology. It's just like a mythology is not real history, because history is something different. Can you see the dialectic between the two again, the dialectic between the secular and religion? So religion can only have a meaning if there is a secular. Because if there's no secular, then this kind of religion doesn't have any meaning. This is a special type of religion that is produced, what Al-Assad says, in modern discourse, in modernity. And then soon, as the empires in Europe are then spreading throughout the world, this becomes of a model for religion everywhere. That this experience of religion in the colonial centers, for example, whether it is Berlin, London, Amsterdam, for example, then slowly becomes a religion, a model. This is what religion ought to be. This is the experience of Europe, and this is experience of the rest of the world.
So again, what you find with Talal Asad, there are two types of religion in contemporary world. Here's basically his contribution to the post-colonial. There is a religious discourse on the margin, which is the first one. So there is a religious discourse still, but this discourse is actually more and more pushed on the side. So the religion as a discourse, this is people like Sabah Mahmoud, Charles Erskine, who have been studying, who are the students of Talal Asad, who speak about this discourse as such. It was alive before, but now it becomes slowly circumscribed as such. On the other hand, religion as belief and experience, that is religion as something inner, something that is a subjective experience, is a model for good religion. Good religion is not out there, but it is actually in here as such, if I can paraphrase that. So as you can see, Talal Asad and David Tinnister give two different dimensions of religion in the post-colony. Both of them don't want to deny or tell us we cannot deny the colonial production of religion. This, for Talal Asad, it is this. But Talal Asad adds another interesting dimension which David Tinnister doesn't do. And this is that there is a discourse. There is a type of religion that actually continues on the margins and that is still standing out there as in opposition to this discourse. Okay, and the third example that I'm sharing with you is that religion is shaped by experiences of subjugation and liberation. This is Charles Long now. So in his Charles Long interpretation of the religion, he is also a scholar of religion. And when he's a much older scholar, he's already passed away, unlike Talal Asad and David Tinnister, who are still alive. Charles Long, I think, passed away in 2020, a few years ago. He started by, he accepted the idea of natural religion. For him, he didn't necessarily see the problem of natural religion in the way the post-colonial scholars did, or even in the way postmodernists did. So he is very different. In that sense, he is unique, but he is still very useful because, like I said, he is coming from the Caribbean. And so therefore, his experience of religion is very different. And so therefore, he approaches natural religion, this idea of religion, very differently. His argument, what does he say, what is the religion? When you study a religion, or you study religions in general, his argument is, or his proposal is, that you must study the hermeneutic of its symbols. Now, this is another important term that I'm throwing in here, the hermeneutic of its symbol. By hermeneutic of its symbol, he is arguing its deep universal meaning. So if I could just pause a little bit, hermeneutic in its literal meaning means interpretation. But for Charles Long, it actually means not interpretation. It doesn't mean interpretation as a kind of a personal interpretation. It does mean interpretation that you can see in more than one place. It's not simply an interpretation that is only of your personal experience. The scholar of religion needs to ponder and reflect, what do these symbols mean? What can we make sense of that? So somebody like Charles Long, for example, speaks about he investigates a lot of ancient religions. Later in his career, he examined African American religion in the United States very, very carefully, and he wants to know what is it that really is driving this meaning of religion as such. This is what he means by hermeneutic. But let us go on, and I hope that it will become clearer as I speak. Then he says, this is a very important point. He says, natural religion is the hermeneutic of religion in the global north. So this natural religion that I was speaking about earlier, okay, that's natural. Sorry, Muhammad Ali, are you writing to me? No, sorry. I thought maybe you are messaging me on my WhatsApp. No, somebody else. So this natural religion, which I was speaking about earlier, which is subject to critique. Now, Charles Long is saying that natural religion is the hermeneutic of religion of the global north. It is not a universal hermeneutic. It is, unlike the other scholars who like Mircea Eliade or others were trying to find out what is religion for everybody, he is saying, no, this is a natural religion, but it only belongs to the global north. It doesn't reflect the experience and doesn't express the meaning of religion
as it was experienced for people who are on the other side of this period, who are on the other side of this subjugation as such. And he directs his work to what is the hermeneutic of religion on the margins? What are the people who are enslaved, like he himself did with African American religion, African American people who were taken from the west coast of Africa, taken across to America, and then experience what kind of religion did they experience? What happens to the religion of the people in India, for example, who are subject to British colonialism, for example, or in South Africa or in Africa as such? What happened? What is the hermeneutic of religion on the margins? So we know what is the hermeneutic of religion in the global north, which is what is being studied in the academy, but we don't know enough about the hermeneutic of religion on the margins. And he suggests, he gave a few examples. I have just identified two of them. The one is that silence sometimes plays an important role. That sometimes we think of religion as having a meaning when it expresses itself in words, when it expresses itself in literature, when it expresses itself in songs. But sometimes you have to listen to the silences, because a lot of the people during the period of subjugation was silence. And so therefore silence plays a very important role if you want to know the meaning of the subjugated. And in fact, David Chittister picks up some of this point as well. And then he goes on in many essays, but I want to summarize this for you. In African American religion, for example, the essential element in the expression and experience of God is his transforming ability. It's very, very interesting. This phrase that he uses is the transforming ability. The ability you are belonging to religion because you want to be different from where you are located. You want to be somewhere else, because you no longer want to remain where you are. So while the natural religion of the global north is emphasizing the experience of the sacred, the experience of being where we are, the experience of feeling the sacred as such, he says that does not speak to the African American, for whom the essential element is the transformative potentiality of religion. Religion has to be something different from what it is. And in this way, for example, what Charles Long does, he opens space for religion on the margin elsewhere. Even though he has given us examples of African American religion, there's a lot more that can be said about natural religion, elsewhere, especially if one takes it from this particular perspective. So again, what Charles Long does is there is a natural religion. He's accepting this. He's not necessarily critiquing this, but he is saying it is a hermeneutic of the global north. The meaning of a natural religion is not something that is shared globally across. So it's not as universal as it might appear to be. And the marginalized religion offers new meanings for us. There are new meanings that still are that we can look at, especially if one ponders and reflects deeply on the experience of religion on the margins, of the people on the margin. So I have a few concluding comments now that I want to make, and then we'll open up for discussion. So what I've tried to do is to share with you is what is religion in the post-colony? What has happened to religion after colonialism, or in the shadow of colonialism as such? I've emphasized the contemporary shape of religion, first of all, that if one looks at from the perspective of the post-colonial scholars, particularly, I'm more particularly interested in them. When you look at what they have to tell us about religion, what they have to tell us about what is happening in religion elsewhere, we can look at Chittister, Assad, and Long as providing very different ways of studying religion, very different ways of understanding the nature of religion. As you perhaps recall, Chittister emphasizes the power dynamics of religion. Assad is telling us about this discursive religion, which is still out there, and which can actually perhaps we should not ignore it, even though we are aware that there is a kind of a modern religion that is there as well. And Charles Long speaks about the meaning of religion that has been hidden from the study of religion. Each of them bring different insights on this production, insights on how it was produced, in the past, and also insights about its production now. What is religion now?
religion in power dynamics, David Chidester, okay, I've already said this as well, religion as a discourse under threat, according to Atal al-Assad, or the hermeneutic of religion of the marginalized as such. So both of them help us to understand how religion was, shaped in the context of colonialism, how it was produced, but all of them suggest to us how religion continues in some way or another. These are the different, at least from these three, I've identified three different ways of studying religion in the post-colony. And I think they provide us the future for religion, for future of religion for continuing study. They provide us insight on how we can continue the study of religion. First of all, they are suggesting that it is pluriversal. It means you don't necessarily need to have only one way of understanding the religion. Religion is certainly much more complex, multiple than before. The second dimension is the interplay of power and disempowerment is very important in religion because of how the shape it has become. And it is this task, finally, to pick up from Charles Long, the task of the scholar to find meanings that are hidden from view, meanings that are not necessarily present as such. So I leave this open here. Maybe we can, if you have any questions, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing more from you in the rest of the session. Thank you. Jazakumullah.
Thank you, Professor Tayyab. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. It's been really enriching. And I'm sure that some of our participants have questions. We have Talha Rahman. Talha, yes, you can go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning, good evening. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, Professor, for this very enlightening lecture. My question is that what you have outlined here is how the history of how intellectuals have the scholars have read and understood religion in colonial societies, and how there has been a post-colonial critique of that interpretation of religion. My question is how the subjectivities of the people about whom these observations were being made. So there is one scholar's discourse, but there is the people who were probably being informed or maybe resisting the discourse that was being carried out in their respect. So how was the subjectivities of the colonized people, taking them as a group, for example, in India, the modernist people, the modernist scholars, and even people like Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, so the reformers and others, how were their subjectivities changed, or how were their subjectivities informed by this scholarly discourse going on, and how does that pan out for the people, for all the for colonized people anywhere? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I think I'm going to answer each one immediately because I can't find a pen that I can write my question down. So I'll try to keep it brief, and then you can keep the questions following. So thank you so much for that question. It's really excellent. So what I was doing in this particular lecture, I think your question alludes to the next step, right? Basically, what do scholars do? How do scholars of religion, in this case, how are they studying religion? So I'm only looking at the models that they are working with. And so what you are alluding to is that, for example, people who are then studying, for example, reform religion in Islam or Hinduism, for example, in India, what are the in what way, how do they make sense of their experiences? One way would be, for example, if you take the view of a perspective from Talal Asad, for example, that he would really question, and in some cases he has questioned reformist Islam, particularly modernist Islamic traditions, as becoming like European religion. He has some critical remarks about how people like for example, I mean, he has written some papers on that to say that because the shape of the shape of religion was being transformed in Europe and therefore exported to the rest of the world, the people who were then changing religion or who were engaging in some kind of transformation, they were sort of imbibing some of this colonialist modern religion that was becoming the norm as such. So I don't think he would say that about, I haven't heard him say that about Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi, but certainly among the different modernists, certainly that emerged in Egypt, in India, and other places as such, that he would say that their religion begins to take the shape of this colonial religion or this modern religion that was created in Europe as such. It's a critical comment. I don't know, maybe you may not agree with it, but this is what they would say about it as such. On the other hand, he would say perhaps of Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi that this was a religion as a discourse. So his theory about discourse would I think would still take into consideration the continuing tradition of Islam and how it changes, but still connects with itself to the past as such. And that changing discourse as such, what Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi and maybe the other scholars do, would fall under what Al-Assad calls the discourse of Islam.